Hello everyone and welcome to the first game of the World Chess Championship 2021 between Magnus Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi, Magnus being the world champion and Nepo being the World Chess Championship challenger. We're gonna cover all of the games that are gonna be played. It's 14 games and the time format will be 2 hours per player and no increment until move 60. So it's a bit of a different story than when Magnus faced Caruana or when he faced Karyakin. It is the I think the same format that was used in the Vishwanathan Anand versus Magnus Carlsen World Chess Championship match, so something that Magnus is used to. So you can't really just let your time go down forever, because you will not have that 30-second increment, at the beginning when you make a move. So first 60 moves should be, sorry, 40, not 60 moves. First 40 moves should be reached, and then you will be gaining some increment after every move, and also you will be given an additional hour on the clock. So that being said, let's check it out. This is game one, already a very exciting one. Let's see what they played and how it went. So Nepo with the white pieces opens with e4. We have e5 by Magnus. So there was a lot of discussion what Nepo will play. Of course, it's impossible to figure this out, but e4 is very solid. Nepo is more of an aggressive player, so it does make sense for him to go e4. But I did mention in the previous video that the only two World Chess Championship games that Magnus lost were playing against the d4 and playing d4 himself. So I thought maybe Nepo goes d4, but okay, he went e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and of course bishop to b5. The Ruy Lopez is on the board. We have a6, Magnus goes for Morphy's defense, and bishop to a4. We have knight to f6, and now Nepo just castles. We have bishop to e7 and rook to e1. So this is very standard stuff, nothing out of the ordinary here. We see this pretty much every day. We have b5, bishop to b3, and here Magnus castles. And now the real question here was, will Nepo play c3 and allow Magnus to go for the martial attack? I was very much hoping for this to happen, but it did not. Nepo played h3, sort of the anti-martial variation. We have knight to a5 now, and this is the real surprise of the game. Usually what people play here is just bishop to b7 or d6, but here knight to a5 is very, very interesting. I don't know if it's a new move. Let me just check really quickly. Queen captures on d5. Let me just check this. Okay. There we go. This is a new move. All right. So here, knight to a5 was played. Now attacking the bishop here, and Nepo didn't really take all that much time to decide whether to capture on e5 or not. He played knight captures on e5, saying that we kind of had this in our preparation, in our training camp. Magnus captured on b3. We have a captures and bishop to b7. And here, Magnus is down a pawn, but he already has a beautifully developed bishop. His dark square bishop is out. His knight is out, whereas Nepo only has a knight developed on e5 and the rook on e1. So Magnus leading in development a little bit, but for the price of one pawn. We have d3 now, as the e4 pawn is attacked twice, so we have to defend it. We have d3 by Nepo, and now Magnus immediately strikes in the center with d5, so not allowing white to consolidate quickly. We have e captures on d5, and now queen captures on d5, threatening checkmate with queen captures on g2. Nepo played queen to f3 fairly quickly, and now comes bishop to d6 by Magnus, putting more pressure on that knight on e5. And now, what do you play here? Well, you could trade queens, but that doesn't really give you all that much. And the problem is you can't really play knight to c3. This is what Carlsen's opening idea is kind of based on. And it's very hard for white to develop his pieces. The problem with knight to c3 is that we can play queen captures on e5, and white is just lost. You've lost a piece, and there's no way of regaining it. For example, rook captures on e5, we're going to play bishop captures on f3, and after we have to move the rook, after something like rook to e1, we move the bishop back, bishop to b7, and we're up a piece. We have a light square bishop, white doesn't. So Nepo, again, finds a move very quickly here. He plays king to f1, and it is now, as of move 14, that we have a completely new game. There are a couple of positions where queen captures on d5 was played, but this is a new move, and it's a very interesting one. Nepo found it very quickly, so probably he had it in his home preparation at some point. Now the thing is a little bit different, because if you go for queen captures on e5 now, or rather after king to f1, rook f to b8 was played, but if you play queen captures on e5 now, well then queen captures on b7 is an option, because now, for example, queen to h2 isn't all that troublesome. Queen back to f3, we're gonna play queen h1 check, king to e2 looks terrible, but it works. Rook f to e8 check, and we're just gonna block with the bishop to e3 with black's queen hanging on h1, so he's gonna have to move it. We're gonna play king to d1, and we've sort of castled and uncastled, but you know, it works, and the black didn't really achieve all that much. He's down a pawn, and white is very happy with his position. So instead of this queen captures on e5, we have rook back to b8 by Magnus, and now what do you play? Well, here we have queen captures on d5, and this is basically forced. It's hard to, you know, make a different move here, because again, if you play knight to c3, queen captures on e5 is the same. The rook is now guarding the bishop. There's not much you can do. Rook captures on e5, bishop captures on f3, and after we move the rook, bishop to c6 or something, again, it's the same thing. So here Nepo trades. We have queen captures on d5, knight captures on d5, and now we have bishop to d2. Again, it's not easy for Nepo to develop his pieces here, because you want to play that knight to c3 move, but if you play this, then this knight to b4 is a real problem, because your bishop is still here. You don't have the option of placing the rook on c1 to defend the c2 pawn, and well, rook to e2, it just looks very clumsy. White's position would be very bad here. So here we have bishop at the d2, waiting with this move, but also freeing up the c1 square for the rook to use if knight to b4 is played. We have c5 by Magnus, again played fairly quickly, and now knight to f3. Nepo just retreats the knight. When knight to c3 again can be played. Now, for example, if knight to b4, we can place a rook, the rook to c1 with the pawn being defended, and it's a playable position. But Nepo decides to go back, knight to f3, and now Magnus really went into not too deep of a thing, but a pretty big thing. And after 20 minutes, he played rook to d8. Interestingly, if you go knight to b4 now, you're kind of inviting bishop captures on b4, and this will double your pawns, but it appears that this will not be good for white, because if this happens, for example, captures, what do you play here now? Now, this is a backwards pawn. It's going to be very hard to defend it. For example, knight b to d2, we're going to play rook to c8, attack the pawn, and after something like knight e4, we attack the bishop to f8. You're going to have to defend it with something like rook a to c1 or rook to e2, but this is a permanent weakness, so it wouldn't be all that pleasant for white to go after this. So the point is, after knight to b4, white can't really capture here. You're going to have to play something like rook to c1, and this would be the position that would probably arise on the board. It looks very nice for black, with you know, white's pieces being placed very clumsy, but Magnus decided against it. So after knight to f3, he went rook back to d8, like I said, after thinking for some 20 minutes, and now we have knight to c3. Finally, Nepo plays this move, and now he offers Magnus this b4 square. Interestingly, the engine gives king to e2 is also a very nice resource, just shifting the king to d1, and you no longer have to worry about your c2 pawn. So castling and uncastling is definitely a thing. So after rook to d8, we have knight to c3, like I said, and now knight to b4, putting pressure on this c1 pawn, c2 pawn. And the question is, will Nepo defend this with rook 8 to c1 or with rook e to c1? So both moves have their merits, but you have to decide on one. And Nepo plays a rook e to c1, so he keeps the rook on the a file, as well, it's a semi-open file, so he decided to keep it there, even though the e file is a fully open file, so you know, it also makes sense to keep the rook there, but of course he has his reasons. And here we just have rook 8 to c8 by Magnus, and now the situation on the clock is some 1 hour and 12 minutes for Nepo and an hour and 26 minutes for Magnus. And here we have knight to e2. Interestingly, it's kind of possible to offer a draw here with knight to a2, just saying, okay, let's trade knights, and if knight c6, knight back back to c3, knight to b4, knight to e2, but, you know, if you've come all the way to Dubai to do this, then, well, maybe you shouldn't have come at all. But okay, after rook 8 to c8, we have knight to e2 now, gaining control of this f4 square, so probably bishop to f4 is the plan, but also just freeing up this c3 square, so we can play maybe c3 at some point. Here we have knight back to c6 by Magnus. You could continue with something like bishop to f8 also. You want to free up this d file for the rook, and now again, if bishop captures and b4 c captures, it's I mean, it looks great for black. It's also not bad for white, so it can be played, let's say d4 here. And it's a pretty funky position. At some point, the bishop might be able to come to e4, attack that c2 pawn, but of course, many things can be played here. At some point in the official commentary, well, there's no basically official commentary. There are many official commentaries now. It's been said that well, you could just you know, play like this, but it's hard because at some point your position will just deteriorate. You play a move and then your opponent makes a move to counter that move. You play a move, your opponent makes a move to counter that move, and at some point you just find yourself in a terrible position. And something similar did happen in the game, just not in this position. So here we have knight to c6. Magnus goes back. He wants to bring the knight to e7, then to g6, and then possibly to f4. This would be very good for him. So bishop to e3. And now comes knight to e7. And here, finally, we have this bishop to f4 move. Interestingly, you could also play knight to g3 here. It looks very ugly because you can capture on f3, you can capture on g3, but none of this is all that great for black. Black is down a pawn, and his real plus side here is that he does have the fully operational bishop pair. So capturing here wouldn't really be all that impressive. Now white has the f2 square for his king, and you've eliminated any possibility of bishop captures and f3 ever being a threat, because now you're just gonna undouble white's pawns. But okay, after knight to e7, we have bishop to f4. Nepo goes for this trade, even though some other moves could have been considered, but you know, it's such a dry position where any move can be considered, and it doesn't really give you all that you know, much advantage. So here, finally, we have bishop captures on f3. Now Magnus gives up the bishop for this knight, but it comes with a good idea. Bishop captures on f3, g captures, bishop captures on f4, knight captures, and now rook to c6, as now white has some weaknesses here. Rook can come to f6, put some pressure on these weaknesses, or maybe even to h6 to put pressure on the h3 pawn. Now, if you look at the position, white is still up a pawn, but he does have 3 pawn islands. White has 2 pawn islands, and it will be a little bit easier for black to attack those pawns if the rooks ever get into the game. Could be very dangerous. So here, rook back to e1, attacking the knight on e7, and knight to f5. This is what Carlsen wanted to do either way. And now, finally, we play c3. We prepare to push some pawns in the center, but also it's a very useful move to prevent, for example, this knight from coming to d4. And later on, maybe we can even play c4 and put our own knight on d5. So here, how do you continue? Well, it seems like you could just kick away this knight and win the d3 pawn. But if you play this, then rook to e5 can be played. And now, of course, you're not going to move your knight. You're going to attack your opponent's knight. And after g captures, rook captures, you're going to capture on d3, white will capture on f4, and we have, well, both players have 3 pawn islands, two rooks each. There's not much to be done here. So instead, after c3, we have knight to h4 by Magnus, putting pressure on the f3 pawn. We have rook to e3, and now comes the moment where you have to decide what to do, and it's a very tricky position, and the best move in the position is pawn to g6. Simply preparing this knight to f5 move, because if the knight comes to f5 to attack the rook, yes, you want to remove this rook and grab the d3 pawn. White can always play rook to e5 and attack that knight. The g6 prevents this, and now knight to f5 is a pretty big threat. But Magnus decided to play king to f8 instead. sort of improving the position of his king. And now it seems like the same idea can still be played, but Nepo, or rather Magnus thought that Nepo did not have a useful move here, because it's not very easy for him to move his pieces, but he does have this very annoying knight to g2 move. And now Magnus really has to decide what to do here. Again, trading knights, that's, they can agree to a draw. That's not, a lot of fun. So Magnus does go back with knight to f5, now attacks the rook, but now comes the move that we've discussed, and black is really missing that g6 move. So rook to e5, attacks the knight, so you don't have time to grab the d3 pawn, g6 now, and now not even rook to d1, but rather knight to e1, attacking this d3 pawn. We have knight to g7, and now comes rook to e4. Again, a very tricky position. The best move probably for white is to just advance the doubled f pawn, and then, well, just prepare f5, especially since black is getting ready to play knight to e6. If he does this now, then we can play f5, and well, this is now really good for white. For example, knight to f4, we're going to go after the h3 pawn, but now we're just going to play f captures and g6, and after h captures, rook back to e3. We're guarding this twice, so no worries there. So this is something that Nepo could have gone for, but instead he played rook to e4, and now it's a little bit easier for Magnus to counter this idea, and he finds it on the spot. He plays f5, attacks the rook, and you have to go back. If you play something like rook to h4 to put pressure on this pawn, you might even blunder your rook. For example, g5 attacks the rook, and now what do you play here? All of these squares are taken by Magnus's pawns, so you're going to have to capture here and then just king here, and well, you lose that rook, because knight covers this, pawn covers this, rook covers this, and that's it. You have to give up the rook, and you're going to lose this game. So instead, after f5, we have rook back to e3, and now comes knight to e6. The knight, of course, has to come to f4. There, the knight will be a monster, since Nepo does not have a e-pawn or a g-pawn to kick it away from f4. And now, here after knight to e6, we have knight to g2. And this is what I said that Anish Giri mentioned in the live commentary, that all of the moves that white made were aimed at countering black's ideas. Of course, the rook is needed here to prevent rook captures on d3. The knight is needed here to prevent the knight, this knight from coming to f4. But now Magnus shifts the attention over to the queen side and pushes the absolute strongest move in chess, and that, of course, is pawn to b4. And now you have some problems here. You can't really react to this. Of course, you never want to capture. If you capture, then this is just terrible. There's really no reason to do this. You have 4 pawn islands, you have 2 doubled pawns. This is just bad. So Nepo, of course, finds probably the best idea. That is king to e2. You have to go help out with the king. And now rook to b8. What Magnus is now threatening is b captures on c3, b captures, and then he wants to win his pawn back, retaining a more active position. We have king to d2. If you try and keep the pawn, for example, with rook to b1, that's just going to end very badly. We're going to play a5, and now what do you do? For example, king to d2, we're going to play b captures and c3, b captures and a4, and now the rook on b1 is a pretty big problem. And the other lines really don't help. So instead, after rook to b8, we have king to d2, and now we have b captures, and rook captures on b3. Now with some threats of maybe rook to b2 check, so we have to counter this. King to c2 by Nepo, and now we have rook back to b7. The problem with doubling up on the b file is the knight on e6. Nepo can just capture here, and that's it. You're lost. If you capture the rook, you're going to lose the rook on b3, and even rook b2 check, king to c1, you don't have a good continuation here. And you're just down a knight. So instead, after king to c2, attacking the rook, Magnus goes back, rook to b7, and now Nepo plays h4. A very useful move, not allowing Magnus to just freely advance those pawns on the king side, and maybe even later on you can undermine this pawn structure with a move like h5. And now, what do you play here? Well, this knight to d4 check move looks very interesting, but it doesn't do all that much. The problem is, after knight to d4 check, of course, you're not going to capture this. If you capture, then it's just game over. It's check. You go here to defend the rook. Now even rook b2 check comes, and after king to e1, we can just play captures. Now, if you capture with the knight, then we can, you know, capture the pawn. So, or rather, if you capture with the pawn, we can capture the knight. So you have to capture with the knight, and it's just very, very bad. You're down the exchange, and your position is terrible. So instead, after knight to d4 check, you would have to play king to d2, and then your position. Sorry, after knight, you would have to play king to d1, and then your position is, you know, just fine. There's nothing to worry about. The knight is just silly there, and the knight has to go back. So that's why it wasn't played. Magnus started with king to f7. And now comes rook e back to e1. Now the king guards the pawns here, and you don't need a rook on e3, as it's a very passive square for the rook. King to f6 by Magnus, and now knight to e3. And now Nepo wants to bring this knight to c4, and there it will be a powerful piece. And now Magnus here had to decide what to play. Knight to f4 seems like a very promising move, as it's a very active knight. For example, knight to c4. We're gonna play rook to e7 now, challenge the rook here, and after this, maybe okay, knight back to e3. Asks what do you play here. Now this knight can't really move because knight d5 check would win the exchange here, so we're gonna play rook to d6 and then keep the position alive. However, in the game, rook to d7 was played by Magnus, and also by playing rook to d7, they've reached move 40, so they've reached time control. Additional time was given to them. They both now got an extra hour on the clock, but Nepo just played knight to c4 here, and this is well, a very annoying move because it's hard to make progress here with black. What do you play here? That's the question. The e5 square is very weak. If knight to e5 is played, then you're going to lose the exchange. So you're going to have to play something like rook to d8, which is not a move that you want to play. Instead, Magnus played rook to e7, but rook to e7 is basically an invitation to a draw, and well, Nepo decided to grab this opportunity. We have knight to e5 attacking the rook. Now you can't move the rook away from the 6th rank because of rook captures on a6, so rook to d6 was played, knight to c4, rook to c6, knight to e5, rook to d6, and knight to c4, and it was in this position on move 45 that Magnus and Nepo agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done here. Like I said, you can't move the rook because this pawn falls, and the white really does not have any active play of his own to go for instead of this repetition. So what do you guys think about game one? I think it was fairly interesting. At the end game not so much, but the beginning and the opening choice, I did enjoy. It's not as crazy as the one that Carlsen and Caruana played in 2018 in London that lasted over 7 hours, and there were so many crazy moments where I think Magnus even had a win at some point, but it was too ambitious to go for such an idea. But here, I think the finest moment of the game is this move 14 after bishop to d6, threatening all sorts of nasty ideas. The Nepo just played king to f1, and he said none of this works. Now my position is fine, and the game just continued. So Magnus gave up a pawn very early on in the game. He got a fully operational bishop pair for it, and then maybe that one point where he could have played it a little bit better, but it's hard to say because this is classical chess. All of these lines have been thoroughly crunched by their teams, by all the engines they're using, and it's hard to say if it would mean all that much here. Instead of this king to f8, just prepare this with the g6, and now knight to f5 is a pretty nasty move to face. It's hard to counter this move. After g6, it's White doesn't really have a good reply to this. At some point, he will have to give back the pawn, but he will probably have to give back the pawn in any line, like in the line that he played. The engine gives c4 as a very interesting move here. Point being that if now you go knight to f5, we can play rook to e5. And now if rook captures on d3, then of course we can just capture this rook. So that's, or rather, after rook captures on d3, we can just capture this rook. So we can't play that, but let's say king to g7, and now the game continues. So maybe something maybe something in those lines. But yeah, very, very exciting. I'm sure after the first game, their teams will have a lot to do, and they will not go to sleep early, as the position might repeat in game 3, where Magnus will again have the black pieces, Nepo will again have the white pieces, and they have to be ready for any and all improvements that are possible. So yeah, that's game 1 of the World Chess Championship 2021. Hope you guys enjoyed that. We're going to be covering all of the games, so stay tuned for that. I would like to thank Eduardo J. Paguaga, Business Coach Academy. Please like and subscribe Ginsu Pankar and David Kimura for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the World Chess Championship 2021. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.